Welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, Executive Vice President, joined today by the House Minority Leader, Rose Pugliese. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We'd love to hear all of your insight on the session that just ended.
Yes, thank you, Kristi, for having me. I'm really excited. You know, even though Republicans were in the minority, we were definitely able to articulate the issues that we heard at the doors, affordability being number one. People just can't afford to live in Colorado anymore, and they're really looking to us for help. And while we may not have been successful in killing everything that came forward that increased fees or enterprises, it was really important that we were able to bring their voices forward. Some of the bills that we brought as Republicans were things like repealing the grocery bag fee, which we heard is the number one issue at the doors. And while Democrats couldn't get there, we were really successful in being able to have those conversations for the people. The same thing on retail delivery fees. We tried yet again to repeal retail delivery fees. Again, didn't go, but these are the issues that really are important to the people that we talk to across the state.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's so important for people, even if it's not actually getting fixed right now, that their issue isn't forgotten.
Exactly.
And that there continues to be a conversation rather than liberals who would love to continue to raise taxes and fees just getting a free pass to do it with no pushback.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So no, I agree with you. That's really important. I think one interesting thing we noticed in the legislature was the lawsuit that I think it was Representative Camacho from Denver tried to bring to order, I believe, the legislature to sue against Tabor in court, like sort of use taxpayer money on both sides, sue the taxpayers with taxpayer money, make them defend themselves with taxpayer money. And my understanding is that the federal court decided 4 years ago in 2021 that Tabor was federally constitutional. So I'm not really sure where he thought he was going to go with that lawsuit, but can you tell us where that ended up in the House or the Senate?
Absolutely. So the resolution was had gone through committee in the House and was set to come to the floor. And Republicans, I think, we did a great job as the minority raising this issue every time anything that touched fees or enterprises. We talked about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We talked about Proposition HH and how the people really loved Tabor. Even the governor, if you remember a couple years ago when he was running for governor, made sure everybody got their refund check in the mail with a nice letter from him saying, here's some extra money for you so you could pay your bills. And so when Democrats now want to challenge the constitutionality of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, I think it was really interesting. But we were able to highlight and continue to beat on the Democrats about, hey, remember what happened last time? And the people really love the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. They love being able to vote on tax increases. They love the limited government portions of it. And so we were able to really articulate those issues on behalf of the people. And because of that, someone had asked, how can Republicans take credit? You're just in the minority. But we are a loud voice in the minority, and those voices, I think, of the people were really heard. And so that resolution never did come to the floor, never did come forward. But, I always say bad ideas in the legislature never go away. They just come back next year in a different form. So I don't think this is the last step in attacks on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I think the Democrats will continue to get more creative in trying to chip away at the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. But if the people get to decide, as they have in the past, we have seen that they always go on the side of Tabor.
Absolutely. I mean, I think polls show 70% of Coloradans, no matter their political party, support Tabor, want to keep it strong. And certainly, to your point, Prop HH and CC campaigns both showed that when the legislature tried to refer ballot measures to take away Tabor rights, people said, no, thank you. I guess I'm curious your thoughts, though, the two pieces of Tabor, which one they're really after and want to crack down on, I guess. Is it the limit on their spending and the fact that they have to refund extra taxes to the people, or is it the voters' ability to choose whether or not they can increase taxes? And I know it's a big loop, like it all feeds into each other, but is there a specific portion of that they especially dislike?
I think they hate it all, to be honest. I think they don't like having to limit the growth of government. I think they want to be able to spend. Colorado doesn't have a revenue problem. I had said this for years and continue to say it. We don't have a revenue problem. Our revenue keeps going up. We have a prioritization problem. And what Democrats don't want to have is the conversation on what the priorities should be in accordance with the proper role of government, right? We should be funding infrastructure and transportation. We have a constitutional obligation to fund public education, which includes charter schools. And are we doing that to the extent that we need to in order to really provide for the people of Colorado? And my answer would be no. That is not what the priority has been for the Democrats since they've taken power. And so the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and limiting the growth of government, having to go to the people and ask, is something they just don't want to do. They want to be able to spend without any restrictions on their spending.
And no restrictions, no restraint, that would be their preference.
That's right.
I'd like to get into fees just a little bit with you. I know it was somewhat of an issue during the legislative session, and just, legislature continues to take opportunities. And I should say the liberals in the legislature, obviously there, to your point, there's a good segment of legislators who fight against this and speak out for what the people prefer when it comes to taxes and fees. But when we look at fees, it seems like a lot of the liberal legislators try to use that as an avenue to raise taxes without calling them taxes. And then they try to get around Prop 117 that voters passed that said you actually can't raise fees either above a certain amount without asking people. Well, they try and fashion into all these different enterprises so they can get around the law.
That's right.
But what are some things you're seeing like on the ground in the legislature that are going on with fees?
So the two areas, and I was actually talking about this with a group yesterday, the two areas that are most concerning to me are fees, increased fees on health insurance, and then increased fees on property insurance, especially around, in the vein of protecting people from wildfires. And what I feel like the Democrats, the direction that they're trying to go is making it so unaffordable or putting so many mandates on health insurance companies and property insurers that they wind up leaving Colorado.
Yes.
And then the only option would be government, right? A single payer healthcare system,
So true.
a single government entity that would then be in charge of property insurance. And I think that that's a really bad road for Coloradans. And when we take away choice and competition, I think that that's really going to make Colorado even more unaffordable.
So it's almost like a sinister side effect of fees, like not only raising taxes on people, but then pricing private companies out of business.
Exactly.
Okay, leaving people just to rely on the government, which to your point is never a good idea. When we see states that have leaned that way, they tend to not be successful, charge people more money, and just not have a great quality of life.
Absolutely. Competition is good. I think having options for people, we talk about it even in the energy space, making sure that people have energy choice and that there aren't mandates on things like you must have an electric stove versus a gas stove, right? Those sort of things. I think the people really, truly want to have those sort of choices.
Right.
And right now, the legislature is saying, no, government will decide for you. And I think that's a bad path for Colorado.
Yeah, I think most Coloradans who like Tabor and their ability to vote on taxes would agree that they should have more choices in energy and housing supply and so many things rather than less. And speaking, I guess, of quality of life, I know you had a signature bill that you sponsored and passed this year, I think called The Right to Try, dealing with children who are very, very ill. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. There's certain bills that you do that help people, and then there's certain bills that really can impact people's lives in a very substantial way. And the right to try for individualized genetic treatments is really important. And so I know I get this question all the time. Well, didn't President Trump during his first administration, didn't he allow right to try? And he did on a broad base, but not for individualized treatments. And so this would allow individualized treatments. Colorado is one of the first states in the nation to be able to do this for individualized treatments. It's not a mandate on insurance companies to cover it. It is not any liability for physicians who are trying, and this is for specifically terminal patients. I'm incredibly focused on terminal children, but it's any terminal patient that needs an individualized treatment could try drugs that are not approved by the FDA. Sometimes the FDA process is just so long, and while we appreciate that, these people don't have that type of time. And so being able to do this on an individualized level, and I think eventually the federal government will probably get there as well, but being able to, and the governor just signed it into law yesterday, being able to put this in place now for terminal patients will really change people's lives while the federal government catches up.
Yeah, and in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it would seem that if more people try this and have the ability to try medications that aren't technically approved by the FDA yet, it would give the FDA even more information as they see more people trying it. And it's not technically a clinical trial, but still more information to see how it's affecting and hopefully saving some lives.
Absolutely. I think the more data and information the FDA can have as they approve these drugs for a broader basis, I think is great. But being able to give people options, especially, and hope, exactly, especially for these families that right now are seeking treatment outside of the United States.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, you know, you hear stories of these families and it's heartbreaking. And so anything we can do in Colorado to be a leader in this front, I think is incredibly important.
No, that sounds extremely important. And it's the kind of bills that don't really get a lot of attention in the news. People don't hear about them, but the lives that they affect and change is going to be so impactful. Like that's the world for those people. And it's an entirely new chance at life when they have none right now.
Exactly.
So congratulations on getting that signed.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, it's actually fascinating to me, this bill in particular. So physicians who I'm assuming that typically they can't just hand someone a drug or a treatment that's not approved by the FDA. But so does your bill basically give them that doesn't require them to do it, but gives them the freedom to do it if a patient asks for it? Or how does that work on their end?
Yes, absolutely. And again, there's no liability for the physician. So if the physician heard of some drug that they've been using in Italy per se, you know, for example, and they're like, hey, I think this could help with your individualized treatment. I don't know if it's going to help, but we can try it. It gives people options. And so again, no liability for the physician, but these are drugs that have, you know, some sort of testing, but haven't gone through the FDA process, but they would still have access to these drugs. And I think it's going to, it's going to save people's lives.
Yeah,
and
well, it will.
There's very few bills we do that actually like save people's lives, but this is one and I'm incredibly proud of it.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Okay, I'd also like to ask you about one of the big issues that kind of came up this session, dealing with parental rights. Started in the House, in your house. So could you just give some people, I guess, an insight into 1312, HB 1312? We also, as Advanced Colorado, put out some information just kind of explaining the bill. It was huge in scope. And we specifically focused on the custody aspect, where parents who didn't want to adopt the state's gender ideology and taught their children something else could have, had their custody rights removed. I think that's a huge violation of the First Amendment. We do a lot of First Amendment work here. And so that was a portion of the bill we were really focused on. But I know it was much broader than that, affecting businesses, charter schools, and then they made a lot of changes to the bill too. And I know the governor signed it. So can you fill people in on your firsthand knowledge being in the House where this all started?
Absolutely. So where the bill started and then where it ended were two completely different bills, both egregious though in its own right, to be honest. The child custody piece was also a piece we were focused on. I work with some domestic abuse survivors, and the ability to be able to raise our children is so fundamental. We have that God-given right to raise our kids in accordance with our values. And so when the government is now coming in and saying, well, now a court could actually take your children away for subscribing or not subscribing to an ideology, I think that that's a bridge too far. And whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, unaffiliated, parental rights is an issue that transcends party lines. And we saw that. We saw hundreds of people coming out. We saw national attention. By the time this bill had gotten to the Senate, it had gotten so much attention, and the Democrats were getting so much pressure to change this bill that that the bill looks substantially different. So the child custody piece was a huge piece of it. There was also a discrimination piece if you misgender or dead name a person, which also applied to parents. So if you were potentially calling your child by the name that you gave them at birth, and that wasn't the name that they chose, there could be some repercussions for parents. And again, a bridge too far for lots of parents, no matter what party you're affiliated with. And so as the bill went through the Senate, it changed substantially. But still egregious in that now you can change government records, your gender on government records without a court order, which leaves open a lot of potential, issues when it comes to government issued IDs. And so I think that was a problem. I think our clerks and recorders never had a chance to really investigate what impacts that would have on them issuing things such as marriage licenses. And so the bill looks very different, But again, I think now it jeopardizes public safety. So there's still parental rights aspects that we're all concerned about, children being able to change birth certificates for their gender. So I think that there's a lot of unintended consequences. I think even the sponsors would probably say there's a lot of gaps in the legislation and implementation is going to be very difficult. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see another version of this come forward next session. And like I said, bad bill ideas don't go away. They just come back in a different form. So this is just the first step in the battle. But I'm really proud of our grassroots activists and organizations like Advance Colorado for getting the word out, for engaging parents so that they could come and testify. I think the hardest part for us was that our voices were shut down pursuant to House rules when this bill was originally going through the House. And so we never really got a chance to vet those issues on the floor. We never really did get the chance to bring the voices of the people forward. And then even on third reading, on final adoption, our voices were shut down yet again. And so we are the voices of the people. And I think the Democrats just need to remember that we have constituencies that we represent throughout the state, and bringing those voices forward is really important.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, it's over 40% of the state typically votes Republican in any statewide election. So I think, while that's not the number of representatives reflected at the House due to districting lines, I think it is definitely something people should keep in mind. Like, sometimes people focus on the number of Democrats or Republicans in the House. So like, oh, there's overwhelmingly more Democrats, although not a supermajority anymore.
Right.
But they forget that that's not necessarily representative of the entire population of our state.
Exactly.
And how they vote. Of course, a huge section being unaffiliated. But still, if you look at how they vote, it's over 40% that typically vote Republican. That's like a pretty split state where all voices should be heard.
Absolutely. And I think whether it's the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, where we see as an issue that transcends party lines, or parental rights that also transcends party lines, these are issues that people on the ground are saying, wait, this isn't where Colorado should be going. It is not where I want my Colorado to go. And we'll continue to be those voices to bring the voices of the people forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for your work there. And Representative Pugliese, as we kind of wrap up this podcast, are there any other bills you think people should know about, or any work you'd specifically like to call attention to that was done on fees or affordability? Just really any last thought you'd like to leave people with?
I think my biggest disappointment, we did, break the supermajority, which I think is great. And we are progressing in a way of bringing more of those voices, especially rural voices, forward. I thought that there would be more conversations around affordability. I really thought there would be more bills that would actually make Colorado more affordable instead of less affordable. And what we saw was the Democrats move in a completely different direction and actually do more, right? More frees, more enterprises. And so while not all of them came through, while this Taxpayer Bill of Rights constitutionality lawsuit didn't come through this time, I think it's something that we do need to be vigilant about and continue to make our voices heard. Just because we're not at the legislature today doesn't mean that the people can't continue to bring their voices forward, so that when we do come into this next session, we have their voices ready to be able to testify and submit written emails, not just to the legislators that you talk to, that listen to you and in your perspective, but to all legislators at the Capitol, both in the House and the Senate, so that they know where the people of Colorado truly are at. And then hopefully that is what it will take for us to be able to bring forward the issues that really are important to the people of Colorado.
Well, I love your point about people getting engaged off season, so to speak, because I do think a lot of people are engaged during the session when the bills are already introduced, they're already written, they're already going forward. Obviously, sometimes there can be changes, but a lot of people aren't aware that legislators are writing their bills and crafting their policy.
Right.
Later in the summer. I think a lot of them don't do it in June, like taking a little bit of a break, but late in the summer into the fall, because they have to submit their ballot titles well before session starts. So I think, and affordability, to your point, is an issue that crosses party lines. That if you poll people in Colorado, they say it's one of their number one concerns is affording the cost of life in our state.
Right.
So it definitely should be something that legislators are reached out to about in the off season and asked to run bills that fix affordability issues. So I like that piece of advice. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, you've been listening to another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, joined by House Minority Leader Rose Pugliese. Join us again next time.